Welcome back. Now, you might be wondering, where is Nigel Farage this evening? Well, he's currently doing his day job in Parliament. He's voting on the Renters Reform Bill. This bill, championed by the Labour government within their first 100 days, aims to reform the private rental market, banning no-fault evictions, limiting rent increases and improving housing standards. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is leading the charge, emphasising the urgent need for better protections for renters, especially vulnerable families. However, critics have argued that the bill goes too far and places a huge burden on landlords, which could therefore lead to increased rents for tenants. Joining me now in the studio is my panel of Dame Andrea Jenkins, a former Tory MP and Minister, and Paddy Ashdown's former Press Secretary for the Lib Dems, Joe Phillips. Welcome, Joe. Welcome, Andrea. Where are you on this rental reform? Do you worry about they might force landlords out of the market?
Absolutely. It just feels like the politics of envy again with Labour. I mean, I've got some constituents who have even contacted me recently, even though I'm not their MP, who, you know, they bought rental property, seeing this as their pension, and now they're going to sell up. So what's it going to do? It means there's less property available, obviously less supply, more demand. Prices are going to go up. So it's going to be difficult, especially for young people, I think, get in their own home.
But Joe Phillips, looking at the detail here, it'll mandate landlords to carry out essential repairs within a specific time frame. It stops landlords and letting agents encouraging tenants to bid above the listed rental price. It's basically equalising the market, isn't it?
Yes,
for renters paying through the nose already.
And I think the problem is, you know, there are not all landlords are bad and not all tenants are bad. And Andrea talks about people who've bought a house to rent, presumably long-term rental. Yes. I live in a town where lots and lots of people who don't even come to the town bought them specifically for Airbnbs. Make it a packet, and that has killed the rental market. Now, you know, I would be very happy to see those people sell up and lose money and make those houses available to people. But I think the problem is that if you live in temporary accommodation, if you have that constant threat of eviction, the no-fault eviction, hanging over your head, that has a terrifically bad impact on children's schooling, on your ability to get a job, on your ability to get credit, on your ability to register to vote, to register with a GP, to access health services, and to continue through the progress of day-to-day life. So I do think, you know, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. We all know the story of Fergus Wilson, the dreadful, dreadful man who bought up acres and acres of property in Ashford in Kent and became a really big landlord. Now, part of the reason that was so readily available was because nobody could get a mortgage because it was built on floodplains and there's hundreds of houses. So, you know, there's a message there. Where do you build houses? What sort of houses do you build? What can you do about properties over shops? There's a really good scheme in Scotland whereby if you've got a second home or a home that you want to use as rental income, you basically lease it to the local authority. I mean, there's certainly in Edinburgh. So they manage it, they find a tenant, they do all of that.
Give you a regular income.
They give you a regular income.
And guaranteed terms to the...
Yes. So, you know, then you could say, actually, yes, I'm doing this, I'm a second homeowner, but I'm doing it for a social purpose. And that's real. But there are too many people, including a new Labour MP who got rumbled the other day for extremely bad... And if you're frightened of being kicked out, Chris, what are you going to say about the mould and the damp and the noise and the rubbish?
Many people have bought properties as an income, as you're alluding to there. Are they being punished for the bad eggs, as it were?
I seriously think they are. And as we've seen what Labour's done with the private schools as well, I think they are just punishing aspiration. And, I mean, regarding rental, I mean, I've also got a constituent who is a leasehold property that they've got a mortgage on. Now, they cannot allow pets in this leasehold. It's like 99-year lease. But we're trying to bring pets into the rental. I mean, I'm an animal lover. So it just shows you, you know, there's so many differences between rental and also people who've got mortgages as well. We've got to make it fair for everybody.
Yeah, the answer is to build more homes. I mean, not on floodplains, as you were saying there, Joe, but build them.
But the answer is to provide affordable social housing. You know, however that
but who's
comes
going to get those social housing? Because, I mean, look, Labour will not guarantee now it's going to go to our veterans. They will not rule out it's going to go to illegal migrants. So who's... I mean, when I was an MP, gosh, people was waiting 4 to 6 years to get onto...
Yes, I know.
Get a property.
But that's
so what Labour are doing with this, people are going to be waiting longer because there's going to be less supply but more demand.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think there needs to be some protection for tenants, and I think you're absolutely right. There does need to be something that isn't a sort of a hammer to crack a nut. You know, it's fine having a goldfish or a small cat, but actually you don't want, you know, dogs.
Well, Joe and Andrea, we can now go to the normal presenter of this show, Nigel Farage, MP, doing his day job. Nigel Farage, welcome to your show, I should say. How did you
vote? Thank you, Chris.
I wonder how you voted.
Oh, I think this is a huge mistake. I mean, yes, of course it's true. There are rogue landlords and there are some tenants that get a rotten deal. There's no question about that. But here's the real issue with rents. With an exploding population, rents are going through the roof. They're up about 21% across England over the course of the last 4 years alone. And that's an average. In some areas, the problem is far more acute. And my real worry is about supply of housing. Now, under the last government, we saw the first shades of this. You know, pressure coming on those that have got Airbnbs because they're worried about second homes in Cornwall or whatever it may be. But now, you know, what is being proposed? I mean, think about this. Not just the idea that if somebody is there renting from you, frankly, you haven't got any means to remove them if you want to, that sort of fixed term contracts would be ended. And then you've got Ed Miliband's EPC certificates, where you've got to bring your house up to a certain environmental standard by 2030, which certainly with older properties would cost a huge amount of money. And you've also, of course, had the tax changes the Conservatives brought in. For example, if you have a mortgage on a buy-to-let property, you can't write that cost off. So what's happening all over the country is people that own buy-to-let properties are saying, do you know what, it's not worth it, I'd rather sell them. That decreases the supply, and that means rents go even higher. So I think this is a very self-defeating piece of legislation, even though I understand the intentions behind it.
What do you say, Nigel, to critics who say that it's MPs who have second homes who are trying to oppose these bigger rights for renters and give them more certainty?
Well, you know, I've got a property that I rent out, but you know what? The way it's going, I may well just sell it. It'll be bought by a private person, and that opportunity for people to take it and use it for a short-term let for a holiday won't exist. Who's the winner in that?
The detail here of the no-fault evictions says that you can give 4 months' notice before you move back in if you have to. I mean, is it as draconian as you're suggesting?
Well, it is, because there is an appeals process against that, and that would kind of go to a court, a junior court, that would decide it. And look, I understand, I repeat the point, I understand the point that if you're a tenant that is effectively being asked to leave, it may be deeply inconvenient and difficult for you. But against that, rights of property ownership are one of the absolutely fundamental freedoms that we treasure in the free world. And I think what we're doing, both the last government and this, we're encroaching upon that. That, I think, is a mistake and wrong in principle. But the biggest problem, I repeat, is all that will happen with this legislation is there will be fewer properties on the market to rent at a time, and we saw the figures just yesterday, when the British population through net migration is exploding.
I've got to ask you, Nigel Farage, about the news of the day, which is the Tory leadership contest taking an unexpected turn. Who do you fear most, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, the two candidates from the right of the party?
Well, firstly, can I apologise to the audience, because I generally get my big predictions right. Well, I got one wrong yesterday. Yeah. I thought Cleverly would... I got it wrong, hands up, you know. I thought Cleverly would sail through. Now, it's very interesting that last night Cleverly was on the terrace here in the Palace of Westminster, having a drink, strutting around, looking very confident, talking to everybody, went to Boris's book launch, and whilst he was almost on a victory parade, people like Robert Jenrick were on the phones talking to as many members of Parliament as they possibly could. That's one factor that I think played. The second factor that played was the Chagos Islands, because this story is far from over. And how funny, before the David Lammy Chagos Islands debate the other day, who left the chamber? Well, of course it was Cleverly, because he'd begun the negotiations in the first place. And that's another contributory factor. But the real reason, I think, that this has happened is supporters of Cleverly thinking, well, he's going to win anyway. Who do we want to knock out? Do we want to knock out Kemi? Do we want to knock out Jenrick? And all being too clever by half. When I look at the two that are left, I'm pretty confident that if it's Kemi Badenoch, she'll fall flat on her face pretty quickly. She's one of the most inconsistent politicians in Westminster. What she says and what she does are two very different things. As for Jenrick, he appears to be a convert to my kind of politics. He now gives speeches walking around the stage, but you need Robert the charisma to carry it off. If you want lessons in being Nigel Farage, I promise you I don't charge that much money for doing it. But I tell you what, if he sticks to this, if he wins with the membership, which he may well do, on this issue of the ECHR, he will find over half his parliamentary party viscerally opposed to it. And my guess is that Jenrick, if he wins, he might make a brave stab at it on policy, but they'll do for him within a year.
But he's coming to eat your lunch, Nigel Farage. Shouldn't Reform voters, and maybe the leader of Reform UK, be a bit worried about these two right-wing candidates?
Worried about people that lie at elections and then do the opposite? I don't think so, do you? Kemi Badenoch, of course, the great Eurosceptic, who, when she had ministerial responsibility, dropped the legislation that would have taken out of our law 4,000 pieces of EU legislation. And Kemi Badenoch, yes, the one that now wants to control our borders and control immigration, who was the one that pushed the hardest for foreign students coming into Britain, bringing their mum with them as dependents. With inconsistency like that, there's very little to worry about.